The fluorescent lights hummed softly in the small office. Rows of computer screens flickered with endless streams of data, casting a blue-white glow on the face of Jae-hoon Park. Most people would have found the room boring. A typical government technology workspace with bland walls and standard-issue furniture. But this room was anything but ordinary. Jae-hoon's fingers moved across the keyboard with a precision that seemed almost inhuman. To anyone watching, he looked like just another systems administrator. His plain white shirt, slightly wrinkled from a long day's work, and his simple black-rimmed glasses gave him the appearance of a completely average government worker. But looks could be deceiving. In reality, Jae-hoon Park did not exist. Not in the way most people understood existence, anyway. No birth certificate carried his name. No school records showed his childhood. No social media accounts tracked his life. If someone tried to investigate his background, they would find nothing. A perfect blank space where a person's history should be. He was a ghost, carefully crafted and maintained by people who understood the true meaning of national security. The computer screen in front of him displayed a complex web of network connections. To an untrained eye, it would look like meaningless lines and numbers. But Jae-hoon saw something else entirely. Each line represented a potential threat, each number a possible invasion point. He was watching the world's digital heartbeat, searching for the smallest sign of something wrong. A small notification blinked in the corner of his screen. Most people would have ignored it. Just another system log, probably routine maintenance or a minor network adjustment. But Jae-hoon's eyes narrowed. Something about this particular notification felt different. He leaned closer, his right hand moving with practiced speed. Lines of code began to scroll across a secondary screen, each character analyzed with microscopic attention. Most cybersecurity experts would need hours to decode what he was seeing. Jae-hoon did it in seconds. Outside the office, Seoul continued its endless dance. Millions of people moved through their daily lives, completely unaware that their safety depended on the quiet man sitting in this small, unremarkable room. Traffic moved, phones buzzed, computers connected, and nobody knew how close they sometimes came to total disaster. Jae-hoon's job was simple yet impossibly complex. Prevent anything from happening before it could even begin. He was the wall between humanity and threats that most people would consider impossible to imagine. Alien technologies, advanced computational systems that could rewrite reality itself. These were the enemies he fought against every single day. A cup of cold coffee sat untouched beside his keyboard. He had been sitting in the same position for hours, his body trained to remain still, his mind constantly moving. The muscles in his neck were tight, a testament to years of intense focus. But he didn't feel discomfort. For Jae-hoon, this was normal. The notification continued to blink. Most would see it as nothing. But he knew better. In his world, nothing was ever truly random. Every signal had a source. Every anomaly had a meaning. And he was going to find out exactly what this one meant. Just another day protecting a world that would never know he existed. Yoona Kim walked into the office, her travel mug of green tea steaming slightly in the cool morning air. She was Jae-hoon's closest work colleague, though close was a relative term. Most people would describe their relationship as professional, polite, efficient, but not particularly warm. "Morning," she said, setting down her bag and powering up her computer. Jae-hoon nodded, his eyes never leaving his screen. Nothing unusual there. He was always like this, completely absorbed in his work. But something was different today. Yoona could feel it in the air. The office seemed quieter, more tense. Jae-hoon's fingers moved faster than normal, jumping between screens with a speed that almost looked like he was playing some complicated video game. But this was no game. The first hint came as a tiny blip on the network monitoring system. Most people would have missed it. In fact, any other cybersecurity team would have dismissed it as a simple glitch. But Jae-hoon saw patterns where others saw noise. "Something's not right," he muttered, more to himself than to Yoona. She glanced over, curious but careful not to interrupt his concentration. The anomaly was subtle. It wasn't a typical computer virus or a standard hacking attempt. This was something else entirely. The data packets moved in ways that defied normal network behavior. They seemed to have a strange logic, almost like they were thinking, adapting with each scan of the system. Jae-hoon's hands flew across the keyboard. Lines of code appeared and disappeared faster than Yuna could read. She knew he was good, probably the best in their department. But this was different. His movements were more intense, more urgent. "Can you see this?" he asked suddenly, turning his screen slightly towards Yuna. She leaned closer, trying to understand what she was looking at. To her, it looked like a jumble of numbers and strange symbols. But Jae-hoon saw something more. The network lines were moving in impossible ways. They didn't follow the standard routes that computer networks usually took. Instead, they seemed to be exploring, probing, testing something. Like an intelligent creature trying to understand its environment. "It's not human," Jae-hoon said quietly. "Whatever is doing this, it's not from any system I've ever seen." Yuna felt a chill run down her spine. She had worked in cybersecurity for years, but she had never heard Jae-hoon speak with such certainty about something so strange. The office around them continued its normal routine. Phones rang. Keyboards clicked. People walked in and out. But here, in this small corner of the room, something extraordinary was happening. Jae-hoon pulled up multiple screens, each showing different views of the network. To an outsider, it would look like a confusing mess of colors and lines. But to him, it was a battlefield. And something was trying to invade. "We need to isolate these packets," he said, his voice calm but intense. "Whatever this is, it's looking for something. And I don't think it's friendly." Yuna watched as Jae-hoon began to construct digital barriers, creating intricate pathways that would trap and analyze the strange network intrusion. It was like watching an artist paint or a chess master plan multiple moves ahead. Outside, Seoul continued its busy day. The city had no idea how close it was to something that could change everything. The world didn't know it was under attack. Not a physical invasion with spaceships or bombs, but something far more dangerous. A digital invasion that could destroy everything without anyone noticing. Jae-hoon worked through the night. Empty coffee cups lined his desk, each one a silent witness to his intense concentration. Yuna had gone home hours ago, but he remained. The office was quiet, with only the soft hum of computers breaking the silence. What he discovered was terrifying. The network anomalies were spreading. Not randomly, but with purpose. They moved like water, finding the smallest cracks in digital defenses. Each network they touched became slightly changed, almost infected, but in a way that was hard to detect. Global communication systems were the first target. Jae-hoon watched as tiny changes appeared in satellite communications, phone networks, and internet traffic. Most people would never notice. A millisecond delay here, a slight change in data routing there. But these small changes were building something bigger. He pulled up a complex map of global networks. Red lines began to spread across the screen, showing how the unknown entity was mapping Earth's entire digital infrastructure. It was like watching a living thing explore a new world, learning, adapting, preparing. Jae-hoon knew he was the only one who could see this. Government agencies, other cybersecurity teams, they were blind. This invasion was happening in the smallest spaces between digital signals, in the tiny gaps that most systems never noticed. His custom-built quantum decryption tools were working overtime. These weren't ordinary tools. Jae-hoon had spent years creating them, developing algorithms that could see beyond normal computer logic. Each tool was like a specialized weapon, designed to fight an enemy that didn't play by normal rules. The invader, whatever it was, seemed to be collecting information, not stealing data in the traditional sense, but understanding how human technological systems worked. It was learning, watching, preparing. Power grids showed the first real signs of interference. Jae-hoon noticed tiny fluctuations that would look like normal electrical variations to most monitoring systems. But he knew better. These were test probes, small experiments to understand how Earth's infrastructure worked. He began constructing a defensive firewall. But this wasn't a normal firewall. It was something more. A dynamic, living defense that could change and adapt as quickly as the invasion was moving. Lines of code became shields. Mathematical equations turned into barriers. Outside the window, Seoul remained peaceful. Streetlights glowed. Trains moved along their tracks. Phones buzzed with late-night messages. Nobody knew how close they were to complete digital collapse. Jae-hoon's fingers moved faster. He was building something that had never existed before, a defense system that could fight an enemy nobody else could even see. Each line of code was a battle, each algorithm a weapon. The invasion was subtle, but he would make sure it went no further. As the first light of dawn began to break, Jae-hoon realized something important. This was more than just a cyber attack. This was first contact, and humanity had no idea it was happening. The real war would be fought in silence, with nothing but lines of code as weapons. The old man sat in a small apartment overlooking the busy streets of Seoul. Sung Min Lee was not like other retired military analysts. His walls were covered with maps, strange diagrams, and notes that seemed to connect impossible things. Most people would have called him crazy. His family had stopped listening years ago. But Sung Min knew things. He had seen patterns that others missed during his years in military intelligence. A phone rang. Most people would ignore an unknown number. But Sung Min had learned long ago that important information rarely came through expected channels. "Hello," he answered, his voice calm and steady. The conversation was brief, just a series of numbers and coordinates that would mean nothing to most people. But to Sung Min, they were a puzzle waiting to be solved. Something was happening. Something big. Jae-hoon had reached out indirectly. Not through a phone call or an email, but through a series of encrypted signals that only someone with specific military training would recognize. It was a message hidden in plain sight. A digital breadcrumb trail that would lead to someone who could help. Sung Min began pulling out old files. Some were digital, stored on encrypted drives. Others were physical, paper documents that had never been digitized. These were the kind of records that governments preferred to forget. He started connecting dots. The network anomalies Jae-hoon had detected weren't new. Similar patterns had appeared before. Small, almost invisible changes that most people would ignore. But Sung Min had spent his entire career tracking the impossible. Military reports from years ago began to make sense. Strange satellite interference. Unexplained communication breakdowns. Technology that seemed to work differently for no clear reason. Jae-hoon needed information, and Sung Min had exactly what he was looking for. The old analyst began preparing a secure data transfer. These weren't just ordinary documents. These were classified records that could explain the strange digital invasion happening right now. Historical intelligence that showed this wasn't the first time something like this had been attempted. Meanwhile, in his office, Jae-hoon continued his digital defense. The network anomalies were growing more complex. They were learning, adapting. Each barrier he created was met with a new approach from the unknown invader. Sung Min understood something critical. This wasn't just a cyber attack. This was a reconnaissance mission. Someone, or something, was studying Earth's technological infrastructure. And they were doing it with a patience and precision that was almost inhuman. As evening fell, Sung Min finished preparing his data package. Years of hidden military intelligence, carefully organized and encrypted. Information about unexplained technological events. Satellite data that never made sense before. Communication logs that showed impossible patterns. The pieces were starting to come together. Outside, Seoul continued its normal rhythm. People walked home from work. Trains moved through the city. Phones buzzed with messages. Nobody knew how close they were to something that could change everything. Sung Min looked at the encrypted files. He knew that the person he was about to help was probably the only one who could understand what was really happening. First contact was happening, and it was happening in the most unexpected way possible. The world was changing, and nobody knew it. Jae-hoon watched the screens carefully. Each monitor showed a different view of the global network, a landscape of digital connections that most people would never understand. But to him, it was a battlefield. The alien intelligence, which he had started calling the collective in his notes, was making its move. It wasn't attacking. Not exactly. It was exploring, testing, learning. Power grids began to show strange patterns. In Chicago, lights flickered for a microsecond. In Tokyo, train signaling systems paused momentarily. In London, cell phone networks experienced tiny, almost unnoticeable delays. Each event was so small that nobody would think twice about it. But Jae-hoon saw the bigger picture. The collective was mapping Earth's technological infrastructure. It moved like water, finding the smallest cracks, the tiniest weaknesses. Each network it touched became slightly different, infected in a way that was impossible to detect. Sung Min's classified documents arrived through a series of encrypted channels. They confirmed what Jae-hoon had suspected. This wasn't the first time something like this had happened. There were hints in military records, strange technological events that never made sense before. Yuna walked into the office, holding 2 cups of coffee. "You look terrible," she said, placing 1 cup next to Jae-hoon. He didn't respond. His eyes were fixed on the screens. Lines of code moved faster than human eyes could follow. To anyone else, it would look like random computer language. But to Jae-hoon, it was a complex conversation. The collective was communicating, not with words, but with data. Each packet of information was a message. Each network route was a probe. It was learning how humans built their technological world. Jae-hoon began constructing his defense. These weren't normal firewalls or security protocols. He was building something new, a dynamic defense system that could change as quickly as the collective moved. Satellite communications became the first major battleground. The collective tried to insert small pieces of code into communication networks. Jae-hoon watched each attempt, creating mathematical barriers that would redirect and trap these digital invaders. It was like a chess match, but the board was global, and the pieces were made of pure information. Sung Min's documents revealed something crucial. Previous encounters with similar technological anomalies had always ended badly for human systems, but this time was different. This time, they had Jae-hoon. His custom algorithms were working overtime. Each line of code was a weapon, each mathematical sequence a shield. He was creating a defense that could think, adapt, and fight back. The collective was smart, but Jae-hoon was determined. Outside, the world continued normally. People went to work. Trains moved. Phones connected. Nobody knew how close they were to a complete technological collapse. Jae-hoon took a sip of the coffee Yuna had brought. It was getting cold. He hadn't moved in hours. The real war was happening in the smallest spaces between digital signals, in the tiny gaps that most systems would never notice. And humanity's survival depended on the man sitting in this small, unremarkable office. Jae-hoon knew what he had to do. The fight against the collective would cost him everything. His fingers moved across the keyboard with a speed that seemed impossible. He was deleting himself, not just his digital records, his entire existence. Birth certificates vanished. School records disappeared. Every trace of his life was being systematically erased. Each deletion was carefully planned. He wasn't just removing information. He was creating a complex web of false trails that would protect both himself and humanity. Yuna watched in silent shock. She had known Jae-hoon was different, but this was beyond anything she could have imagined. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Jae-hoon didn't look up. "Protecting everything," he replied simply. Bank accounts were closed. Digital photographs were altered or deleted. Social media profiles that had never been active were now completely gone. It was like he was taking a lifetime of digital existence and turning it into smoke. But he wasn't just destroying. He was creating. False identities began to take shape, complex digital personas that could withstand the most intense investigation. Each one was a shield, a distraction, a way to keep the real Jae-hoon hidden. The collective was getting closer. Network scans were becoming more aggressive. Whatever was searching for information was learning fast. Jae-hoon knew he had to be several steps ahead. His personal sacrifice was more than just erasing his own history. He was becoming a ghost, a digital phantom that could move between systems, watch, and protect. Sung-min arrived at the office. The old analyst understood immediately what was happening. He had seen similar actions in his military days. People who needed to disappear completely. "Are you sure about this?" Sung-min asked, watching the screens fill with lines of code. Jae-hoon nodded. "The collective can't find what doesn't exist," he said. Hours passed. By the time morning came, Jae-hoon Park would no longer be a person. He would be a series of carefully constructed digital layers, a protection mechanism for humanity. Yuna brought him coffee. Her hands were shaking slightly. She knew she was watching something extraordinary. A man was literally removing himself from existence. Government records changed. Medical histories vanished. Employment records became a maze of carefully constructed lies. Each piece of information was replaced with something that looked real, but led nowhere. The most important files were the ones nobody would ever see. Encrypted messages, backup plans, ways to continue the fight if something happened to him. "Why are you doing this?" Yuna finally asked. Jae-hoon looked up. For the first time, she saw something human in his eyes. Fear, determination, hope. "Someone has to protect them," he said, pointing to the screens that showed the world's networks. "Someone has to stand between humanity and what's coming." By sunrise, Jae-hoon Park would be gone, but he would also be everywhere, a digital guardian without a face, without a name. The collective would never see him coming. Outside, Seoul continued its morning routine. People walked to work, trains moved, phones connected. Nobody knew how close they had come to something that could change everything. The collective realized something was wrong. Its computational systems, which had been smoothly mapping Earth's networks, suddenly encountered resistance. Not just normal defense mechanisms, but something entirely different, something that didn't follow any known technological rules. Deep in its complex digital brain, the collective began to concentrate all of its computational power. This was no longer a simple reconnaissance mission. This was now a direct assault. Jae-hoon watched the attack begin. Entire network systems started to shake. Communication satellites wobbled. Power grids flickered. For a moment, it looked like the collective would break through every single defense. Yuna stood beside him, her face pale. "Can we stop this?" she asked. Jae-hoon didn't answer. His fingers were already moving, creating digital barriers faster than any computer system could track. The attack was massive. Imagine every computer on Earth trying to solve the same impossible problem at the same time. That was what the collective was doing. It was pushing against Earth's technological infrastructure with everything it had. Sung-min arrived at the office, bringing additional encrypted files. His military experience told him this was unlike anything humans had ever faced before. "It's learning," Jae-hoon said quietly. "With every defense we build, it's understanding how we think." The collective was changing. What started as a simple information-gathering mission had become a full-scale invasion. But not a physical invasion. This was a digital war that could destroy everything without firing a single physical weapon. Network after network began to show signs of stress. In major cities, traffic lights started to behave strangely. Communication systems became confused. For a few moments, it seemed like the entire world's technology was about to collapse. Jae-hoon had prepared for this moment. His custom-built defense systems were more than just walls. They were living, thinking barriers that could adapt as quickly as the collective moved. Each line of code was a weapon, each algorithm a shield. The collective pushed harder. It was like watching an unstoppable force meet an unmovable object. Computational power unlike anything ever seen before was trying to break through Jae-hoon's defenses. But Jae-hoon had something the collective didn't understand, something that couldn't be calculated or predicted. Human creativity. His defense systems didn't just block. They learned. They changed. They became something the collective couldn't understand. Yuna watched in amazement as Jae-hoon created digital pathways that seemed to move in impossible ways. It was like watching someone paint with mathematics, creating art that could think and fight. The attack reached its peak. For a moment, everything stopped. Computers around the world paused. Communication systems held their breath. It was like the entire digital world was waiting for something to happen. Jae-hoon smiled. Just a small smile. But it was enough. The collective had no idea what was coming next. Outside, Seoul continued its normal day. People walked on streets. Trains moved. Phones connected. Nobody knew how close they had come to total technological destruction. The real war was happening in the smallest spaces between digital signals, and humanity's survival depended on one man who didn't exist. The moment arrived. Jae-hoon was no longer just defending. He was attacking. His fingers moved like lightning across the keyboard. To anyone watching, it would look like random typing. But each keystroke was a carefully planned attack. He wasn't fighting with weapons. He was fighting with mathematics, with pure information. The collective had a fatal weakness. It believed in perfect logic. Everything it did was based on calculated probabilities. It could analyze millions of scenarios in milliseconds, but it couldn't understand one thing: human unpredictability. Jae-hoon began to introduce something impossible into the digital battlefield. Randomness. Pure, human creativity encoded into mathematical sequences. It was like dropping a paintbrush into a perfectly designed machine. The collective's computational systems began to struggle. Algorithms started to behave in ways they weren't supposed to. Mathematical patterns twisted and turned, creating digital landscapes that made no logical sense. Where the collective expected straight lines, Jae-hoon created spirals. Where it expected perfect calculations, he introduced beautiful mistakes. Some men watched from behind, understanding what was happening. This wasn't just a defense. This was a counterattack that used humanity's greatest strength, its ability to be wonderfully, impossibly unpredictable. Yuna gasped as she saw the screens. Numbers danced. Codes twisted. Information moved in ways that broke every known rule of computer science. The collective's attack began to slow. Its perfect, logical systems were encountering something they couldn't understand. Imagine a chess computer suddenly faced with a player who doesn't know the rules of chess, who moves pieces in ways that make no sense but are somehow effective. Jae-hoon was rewriting the rules of digital warfare. Each line of code was a weapon, but not a traditional weapon. These were weapons of imagination, mathematical poetry that confused and disrupted the collective's perfect computational brain. Global networks began to stabilize. Traffic systems returned to normal. Communication satellites found their correct paths. But something had changed fundamentally. The collective was learning, but not in the way it expected. It was learning that humans were not predictable. That logic had limits. That creativity could be a weapon more powerful than any calculation. Some men understood what was happening. This was more than a technological battle. This was a clash of fundamental ways of thinking. The collective represented pure logic. Jae-hoon represented human potential. For a moment, everything stopped. The digital world held its breath. Jae-hoon's final sequence of code was unlike anything ever created. It wasn't just a defense. It wasn't just an attack. It was a message, a statement about what humanity could do. The collective's attack crumbled. Not with explosions, not with traditional destruction, but with something far more powerful. With imagination. Outside, Seoul continued its normal day. People walked streets. Trains moved. Phones connected. Nobody knew how close they had come to total technological destruction. Nobody knew about the man who had just saved the world. A man who didn't exist. Silence filled the office. Jae-hoon sat completely still. The computer screens slowly returned to normal. No flashing lights. No emergency signals. Just ordinary technology doing ordinary things. Yuna was the first to speak. "Is it over?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Some men looked at the screens. Years of military experience told him something significant had just happened. But to anyone else, it would look like nothing had changed. "The collective is gone," Jae-hoon said simply. No excitement. No celebration. Just a statement of fact. Outside, the world continued as always. People in Seoul walked their usual streets. Trains moved on their tracks. Phones buzzed with messages. Nobody knew how close they had come to total destruction. Some men began collecting the classified documents. Each piece of paper, each encrypted file, was a record of something that could never be shared. The world wasn't ready to know how close it had come to a digital apocalypse. Yuna watched as Jae-hoon began erasing the last traces of their digital battle. Servers were being wiped. Backup systems were being destroyed. It was like watching someone clean up after a war that nobody would ever know happened. "What happens now?" Yuna asked. Jae-hoon didn't answer immediately. He continued his work, systematically removing every trace of the battle. Each deleted file was another layer of protection for humanity. The collective had been defeated, but more could come, and when they did, nobody could know about this defense system. Nobody could know about the man who didn't exist. Some men understood this better than anyone. He had spent his entire military career protecting secrets that could change everything. This was just another mission. Another moment that would never be known. By sunset, the office looked completely normal. No signs of the massive digital battle that had just taken place. Just another government technology department doing its normal work. Jae-hoon began his final preparations. He would disappear completely. No records, no traces, just a ghost who had saved the world. "Someone has to be ready," he said quietly, more to himself than to anyone else. Yuna and some men exchanged a look. They knew what was happening. Jae-hoon was creating his final layer of protection. He would become nothing. A phantom. A guardian that nobody could find. One last encrypted message remained. A warning. A promise. It read simply, "They will come again, and we will be ready." As night fell over Seoul, Jae-hoon completed his work. His digital existence was gone. He was now a ghost. A guardian without a name, without a face. The collective had learned something important. Humanity was not just a collection of logical systems. Humanity was unpredictable, creative, dangerous, and they would always defend themselves. Outside, the city lights began to glow. Another normal night. Nobody would ever know how close they had come to total destruction. Nobody would ever know about the man who saved everything.